And we absolutely love this facility. You know, your kids just don't go to school here. This is such a big part of their lives. So all the teachers that were here, when they were here, thank you so much. I'm sure they put you through some headaches. And Mr. Faust, you went through a rough patch with Connor that really helped him. So we'll never forget that. So when I did cover Trey, and he was a tremendous politician. I didn't cover a Senate race, thankfully, because it was nasty, and that's when I left the paper. But I was a journalist for 27 years. And Nancy said, tell a music anecdote, which means an embarrassing one, so I will. I was a print reporter, political columnist, and had done a lot of television. I had, it's hard to believe, I can't figure this thing out, but I'm just gonna hold it. And I was pasty and I was white because we didn't have makeup. But I did an interview show on ICN for 15 years where I would have politicians come in and I would do a half hour with them, and it was well respected and it was well received show. There's Connor back in the day, those were great days. He's 25 now. But I was doing that show, and then they came to me when my daughter was just getting ready to start to college, and the old people in the room, like me, will remember Nancy James. She was on the Bob Braun show. They said, we're gonna do a morning show, and Nancy's gonna be the main host, we want you to co-host. And they paid me for it, which is hard to believe. And with a daughter getting ready to go to college, it just about would have covered it. So I said, well, I'll do it. But I said, hey, look, I'm a political reporter, man. I'm not going to do any cooking or any kind of flowers or anything like that. And they said, okay, first day, we'll be in the kitchen. Oh, what's this? Isn't that lovely? What's this called? Salt? Oh, isn't that wonderful? So my wife watches the first day, and she goes, it was awful. You know, you got to start getting figuring this out. So the next day, we were going to adopt it. We were giving away kittens. We were going to try to get people to adopt kittens. And I love cats. We've had them all our lives. But I'm horribly allergic to them. If I pet them, I got to wash my hands right away, or my face swells up. So sure enough, I'm handling this cat, and we take a break, and I scratch my face. By the time we come back, my eye was completely shut. And I said, welcome back, everyone. We got these cats here today. Let me ask you a question. Why do cats do this? And I look at the camera, and my wife said, oh, my God, turn it off. It's going to... But my talk about failing and succeed, so I failed, but I kept going back, and I ended up doing that show for 3 years, and it was a good experience. Because you can't be afraid to fail. You're going to fail. I've got a PhD in that. And so one thing I want to talk about tonight is I left journalism 9 years ago. I lobby now and do communications. Jay Fawcett, who was the city manager at Covington, and we started a firm, and my daughter works for us. She's our first employee. But I love to read, and I don't watch that much television other than sports and news. My wife got me a Kindle for Christmas, and I just love this thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the books that inspire me. And among those books, one of my favorite books is To Kill a Mockingbird. My father was an attorney, and he did some civil rights work in the 60s, and I loved Scout, who wanted to right all wrongs, would take anybody on, hated to see the animals die. I loved her. Well, I married Scout, my wife, and I raised a Scout. So that was great for me to have that. I knew there was going to be some connection in that in my life. I love these tough women. I need them. Too Big to Fail, a book about the financial crisis. 100 years from now, when they say, what's it like? What was 08, 09 right? You're going to want to read this book. Ray Bradbury, I'm not a science fiction guy, but he wrote a book on Zen and the Art of Writing, which really helped change my life with Zen. Not change my life, but sure gave me a different direction about not taking things so seriously, waking up every day, just doing the little things you have to do, and the big things will take care of themselves. Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute. But my favorite book all time, the book that inspired me more than anything, is A Christmas Carol. And I think sometimes people are surprised I say that because I read so much nonfiction and so much history, but I've loved this book since I was a kid, and I love the show. And for so many reasons. One, it was the first really... Christmas was starting to die out a little bit in the 1830s, 1840s. And this book was the first book about Christmas that reinvigorated Christmas. It was the first popular ghost story ever written. It was immensely popular. It was written in 1843, and it's never been out of print. There's some estimates that the only book that's ever sold more than A Christmas Carol is the Bible. And it was this tremendous social commentary that Charles Dickens about Victoria, England, and the way the poor were treated and the way children were treated. And it's about redemption. When Dickens wrote this book, he had taken on too much work. He was a journalist, and he was just starting to become an author. And he would take on work because he was so terrified of being poor. Well, when he was a kid, his father was well off, but he spent too much money. And when Dickens was 12, he spent 2 years while his father was in a debtor's prison, he had to work in a shoe polish factory. And it was this horrible place that is in all of Dickens' work. Orphans, sickly and dying, and rats, and they treated the kids terrible. And that just stuck in his head. I want to make money so I never have to live this life. And he wrote A Christmas Carol. He promised it would be done in 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks to write it. And he wrote the first draft, and it was very dark. Tiny Tim died. Scrooge, the ghost, came, but they didn't redeem him. He died, this old miser, bitter. Because that was Dickens' frame of mind at that time. And his assistant read it and said, it's too dark. You've got to find a different inspiration. So he went back to that shoe polish factory. And it was abandoned by then, but he just sat there. And it was dark and dank, and he remembered it. And he said, this is what I don't want to be. So he went back and he rewrote the book, and he made it about redemption and how you can be down and you can fail, but there's a way to come back. I mean, those ghosts taught Scrooge a lesson, and look the way he lived. And Dickens' career took off after that, and it changed his life because he learned how to overcome his fears and overcome that failure. And I mentioned Malcolm Gladwell because he wrote a book called David and Goliath. And in that book, he did a study and talked to entrepreneurs, and he talked to C-suite executives of Fortune 100 companies. And about anywhere from a third to a half of them have some kind of learning disability. And that always fascinated me. And his research showed, and the interview showed, that these people, they succeeded not because of it, not in spite of it, but because of it, because it taught them how to work harder. It taught them how to overcome. They had to learn new skill sets. And I had ADD. I was the elephant man of ADD. I mean, when I went to Catholic school and the nuns were constantly on me about paying attention. So I had to learn to focus. And that's the redemption that I know. My wife's laughing. I still have to. But I learned focus, multitasking, and overcoming that and taking that as a challenge. And that inspired me. It still inspires me that I know I'm always going to make the right decision, but I'm going to work hard and focus on it. We do a lot of crisis communication in our firm. People get in trouble, white-collar crime, embezzlements, social media gaffes, whatever. And I was talking to my daughter about my talk and what I wanted to say, and she said, you always are calm in the storm. That sometimes my other partners will panic and the people in our office, and I'll just walk in and try to handle it. It's nothing like being in Iraq, but it is certainly can be challenging. Part of that's because I was in journalism and on TV and embarrassed myself. But I just try to stay calm. Whenever there's a problem at the house, immediately, what's the solution? What is the solution to the problem? You can't wring your hands. You can't worry about making the wrong decision. You don't want to make the wrong decision, but you want to be like Dickens. You want to get that motivation where it's coming from. And that's how I get up every day. And that's the lesson I want to give. When I was asked to do this, I MC a million things I hardly ever talk about myself. So I was really honored to do this. And I hope it was a good lesson. So thank you very much for having me.